Spain is the miracle economy of Europe. It's growing faster than almost anywhere else in the developed world, creating more jobs than France, Germany, and Italy combined. And politicians across the continent keep pointing to it as the proof that their model actually works. And on the headline numbers, they're right. But the reality is quite different once you look at who that boom was actually built for. Because behind the record employment is a young Spaniard who still cannot find work, cannot afford a home, and is being told to celebrate a recovery he has never once felt. So today we break down the official miracle the ministers keep selling, the hidden mechanics they would rather that you ignore, and why this might just be the model that the rest of Europe is about to copy. My name is Nick, and this is the Finance Bureau. Now, on paper, the story really does write itself. Spain's economy grew 2.8% in 2025, while the Eurozone as a whole limped along at 1.5%, and in some comparisons, closer to 1%. And that is more than double the bloc's pace. And the jobs figure is even more striking. Spain's Minister of Economy, Trade and Enterprise claimed in April that the country created 40% of all the new jobs in the Eurozone, despite accounting for just 10% of its economic output. Now, a Euronews fact check using Eurostat data puts Spain's actual share closer to 25% of net Eurozone job gains. But even at a quarter, that's still a remarkable performance for an economy representing just 1/10 of the entire bloc's output. That is approximately 600,000 net new jobs in a single year, and more than 2.4 million since 2020. The IMF called Spain's performance significantly faster than its Eurozone area peers, and the European Commission credited robust domestic demand and a strong labour market. The Economist had already crowned it as one of the best performing economies in the world. So the picture being painted is one of a continent that is stuck in the mud and one country flooring that accelerator. But while that picture shows us that something grew, it doesn't tell us how, and it certainly doesn't tell us for whom. And the moment you look closer, the miracle starts to look like something else entirely, because the single most important question in this entire story is very simple. Who actually filled those jobs? And the answer is the part the ministers tend to skip over. Since 2019, roughly 3 out of every 4 new jobs created in Spain have gone to migrants, not Spanish nationals. The figures from BBVA research are quite something. Between the end of 2019 and late 2025, employment among foreign-born workers grew by 51.7%. Over the exact same period, employment among Spanish nationals grew by just 4.6%. And in the most recent stretch, the Real Instituto Elcano found that around 90% of the net new jobs created between early 2024 and 2025 were taken by foreign-born workers. So, this is the foundation the boom is actually built on. Foreign-born residents now make up close to 20% of the entire population, around 1 in 5 people living in Spain. And there is a demographic reason for this that nobody really disputes. Spain's fertility rate has collapsed to around 1.1 children per woman, far below the 2.1 needed just to sustain the population. Put simply, without immigration, Spain's aging population would barely have grown at all, and the labor force would be shrinking. So, the government has leaned into it hard. In April 2026, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's government pushed through the Royal Decree 316 of 2026, a mass regularization of undocumented migrants. It was approved by the Council of Ministers on the 14th of April and entered into force on April 16th. The official estimate is that around 500,000 people will be eligible, handed a renewable 1-year residence and, crucially, a work permit. Independent estimates run higher, with one think tank putting the undocumented population closer to, get this, 840,000 people. The application window runs from April to the end of June 2026, and this is Spain's seventh such regularization in 40 years. Sanchez framed it as an act of justice and as a necessity for the prosperity of the economy and the survival of the welfare state. And from a fiscal angle, the logic holds. Migrants contribute around 8 billion euros a year into the pension system, propping up a structure with a rapidly aging base. But here is the uncomfortable reality. This is growth by volume, not value. When economists strip out the rise in population, the picture changes completely. In 2025, even as total GDP grew 2.8%, output per worker actually fell by 0.3%. The country produced more simply because more bodies were working, not because those workers became more productive. As one economist at the University of Exeter put it, a significant part of Spain's growth comes from a rising population. Full stop. And the jobs themselves cluster at the lower productivity end of the economy. Migrant workers are heavily concentrated in hospitality, agriculture, construction, and domestic service, sectors where output per hour is noticeably weak. A BBVA found that foreign workers' GDP per hour worked sits 19% below that of Spanish nationals. So, the engine is running, but it is burning more fuel to go the same distance. And this begs the question of how ordinary people are supposed to make sense of an economy where the official story and the lived reality have come this far apart. And this is exactly where the Finance Bureau newsletter comes in. It's absolutely free, and we break down everything regarding global finance, commodity markets, macroeconomic trends, and monetary policy so that you never miss what really matters. All you have to do is click the link in the description or scan this QR code on the right of your screen to get started. And now, back to the disconnect, because this is where real households start to become affected. You see, while ministers were celebrating a jobs miracle, Spain was sitting on the highest youth unemployment in the entire European Union. Nearly 1 in 4 young people, around 24%, could not find work. The EU average is 15.1%. Germany's is closer to 7%. So, at the precise moment Spain was supposedly leading the bloc on job creation, almost a quarter of its young people were locked out of the labor market entirely. And it gets worse. In the enclaves of Melilla and Ceuta, youth unemployment runs at 71% and 55% respectively. This is not a labor market of a booming economy. This is two distinct economies living in the same country. And then there is the second wall the average Spaniard keeps slamming into: housing. According to analysis cited by The Atlantic, average home prices in Spain rose by more than 50% between the end of 2020 and the end of 2025. In 2025 alone, prices jumped 12.7%, the fastest annual rise since 2007, right before the last housing bust. And that is more than double the EU average, and property is now around 83% more expensive than it was in 2015. And the reason is brutally simple. There are nowhere near enough homes. CaixaBank estimates a cumulative shortage of around 765,000 homes built up between 2020 and 2024, with construction meeting only about 20% of actual demand. Spain needs somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000 new homes a year just to keep prices stable. It has struggled to complete much more than 100,000. Meanwhile, much of that surge in demand is being driven by the very immigration that's powering the GDP figure. The same population growth inflating the jobs number is inflating household formation, and the homes are simply not enough to meet it. So the boom feeds the housing crisis, and the housing crisis crushes the people that boom was supposed to help. The result is a generation that cannot leave home. Idealista described the situation at the end of 2025 in a single phrase: a national emergency. And remember, all of this is happening while real wages have gone nowhere. CaixaBank found that real wages were actually 0.3% lower in late 2025 than they were back in 2019. So the average worker's purchasing power has not improved despite years of record growth. The numbers are real, but the prosperity is not being felt by the people whose country is producing it. And that brings us to the bill, because every model like this eventually has to be paid for. Start with the productivity, which is the deepest problem of all. GDP per worker has essentially been flat since 2019, and Spain's productivity convergence with the rest of Europe stalled out back in the early 2000s. Economists describe this growth as extensive rather than intensive, meaning it comes from more workers, not better ones. And an economy that grows by adding bodies rather than raising output per body has a hard ceiling waiting for it. And then there is the debt. Spain's public debt hit a record 1.74 trillion euros in March, which works out to 101.6% of GDP. It has come down from a pandemic peak, but it remains the debt load of a country that depends on growth to keep its finances upright. And the country's own independent fiscal authority warned that without serious reform, that ratio could climb toward 181% by 2070 as aging costs pile up. Which leads us to the trap at the center of this entire model. The growth is dependent on immigration continuing at full tilt. The IMF stated plainly that Spanish consumption is underpinned by continued inward net migration. The Bank of Spain said the labor force outlook is heavily influenced by expected migration flows. In other words, turn down the tap and the miracle stalls. And the IMF is already signaling exactly that, projecting growth will slow gradually as demographic headwinds intensify, settling at a medium-term potential of just 1.7%. From 2.8% today down toward roughly 1.7% as the inflows moderate. The dividend fades the moment that the flow does. And here is the final piece of the picture. Social cohesion. Because when natives feel a boom was built for someone else, that resentment does not stay contained. In May, thousands marched through Madrid over the cost of housing. In July of last year, the town of Torre Pacheco saw 3 nights of violent street clashes between far-right groups and the North African migrants. Polling now shows 61% of Spaniards view migration as a threat, and 38% oppose the government's regularization scheme outright. The far-right party, Vox, has turned the whole thing into a single devastatingly effective slogan that secure borders mean affordable housing. They have fused the immigration question and the housing crisis into one issue, and they are aiming their message directly at the young Spaniards locked out of both. The IMF itself now lists domestic political fragmentation as a key downside risk to the entire outlook. So Spain's big problem is not a lack of growth. The economy is undoubtedly enlarging and more jobs are undoubtedly being added. The problem is who is paying for it all and who is being left out. This is a model that produces an impressive GDP figure while the average citizen sees flat wages and unaffordable homes, and a 1 in 4 chance that their kids cannot find work. It generates economic activity by importing people, while struggling to generate prosperity for the people that are already there. And the reason this matters far beyond Spain is what comes next. Because the OECD has openly praised Spain's immigration overhaul as a model for flexible, labor-oriented migration management. Every aging, low birth rate nation in Europe is watching this, and Spain is being sold as the blueprint. Embrace migration, inflate the tax base, keep the headline growth alive. Politicians get to stand in front of a 2.8% growth figure and a record jobs number, while the businesses staffing low-wage sectors with an endless supply of labor see huge profits. But the cost is carried by the young Spaniard priced out of a home, the worker whose pay has not moved in 6 years, and in a society being pulled apart by a boom it never shared in. This is the model Europe is being told to copy. A miracle on the surface, a fracture underneath. But what do you reckon? Does Spain manage to turn this volume into real, lasting prosperity and prove the doubters wrong? Or does the model crack first, with the growth fading as migration slows and the social tensions boil over? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to understand how these very same demographic and debt pressures are tearing at the rest of the continent, you can check out our deep dive on Europe right over here. And that's all from me today. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Nick, signing off.